My stepmother kicked me out because I refused to sell the land my father left me. Looking back, I realized my life changed forever because of the patch of worthless desert and my dad's obsession with falling stars. I'm Michael Cooper, 19, from a dusty speck on the map just outside Sedona, Arizona. The kind of town where everyone knows your business before you do, and the one stoplight feels more like a suggestion than a rule. Growing up, it was just me and Dad. John Cooper, high school science teacher by day, stargazer extraordinaire by night. Mom split when I was 4, chasing some dream in California that apparently didn't include us. I barely remember her face. Dad never seemed to mind our little 2-person family. He had his students, his stars, and me. Every single weekend, like clockwork, we'd load up his ancient Chevy pickup, a rusted-out '87 model he lovingly called Neil after Neil Armstrong, and head out to our spot in the desert. Why Neil? I asked him once when I was about 10. Dad patted the truck's dented hood affectionately. Because he's old, reliable, and makes absolutely terrible landings, he said with that crooked smile of his. If you ever saw Dad attempt to park that beast, you'd get the joke immediately. The man could identify distant galaxies, but somehow couldn't pull into a space at Walmart without taking 3 attempts. Those desert nights were our thing. Just us, that rickety telescope, and the universe. Dad would point out constellations, planets, and meteor showers while I'd lie on the hood of Neil, munching on cool ranch Doritos, and try to wrap my young mind around concepts like infinite space and light years. Most people look at the desert and see nothing. Dad would say, sweeping his arm across the darkness. Astronomers look at nothing and see everything. I thought it was just another one of his cheesy teacher quotes until I got older and realized how right he was. The emptiness out there wasn't empty at all. It was full of possibilities, history, and questions waiting to be answered. Then last spring, during my first semester at Sedona Community College, everything fell apart. Dad had a massive heart attack while setting up a science lab experiment. Gone at 47. No warning, no goodbye, no chance to tell him I'd finally decided to major in astronomy instead of business like my stepmom Karen wanted. Karen, my dad remarried when I was 12. She was fine, I guess. Not evil like in the movies, but not exactly warm either. Always treated me like an awkward fixture she'd inherited along with the house. Something to work around rather than embrace. After the funeral, everything moved in a blur. I was technically an adult, so there were no custody issues. But suddenly living with just Karen felt like being a guest in what used to be my own home. Conversations became shorter, silences longer. 3 weeks after we scattered Dad's ashes in the desert under stars, exactly where he would have wanted, Karen informed me we needed to meet with Dad's lawyer. I figured it was about the house, or maybe Dad's teacher pension. I was wrong. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and coffee. Mr. Daniels was an older guy with kind eyes who'd apparently been Dad's friend since high school. He got right to business, explaining that Dad had updated his will just last year. The family home was jointly owned with Karen, so that remains with her, he explained, while Karen nodded beside me. No surprise there. Then came the curveball that would change everything. However, John specifically left to you, Michael, the following items: his Celestian telescope, his collection of astronomy books and equipment, and... Mr. Daniels paused to adjust his glasses. Approximately 40 acres of land in the Coconino County Desert, including the trailer structure located on the property. I nearly choked on the complimentary water I was sipping. Land? What land? Dad owned land? And a trailer? Since when? Karen's face darkened beside me. This was clearly news to her, too. That's impossible, she said sharply. John never mentioned owning property besides our house. Mr. Daniels slid a folder across the desk. John purchased this land before your marriage, Karen. It was a separate property and legally passes to Michael as stated in his will. Inside the folder were property deeds, tax records, and a survey map. The location hit me like a punch to the gut. It was our spot, the exact place where Dad and I had spent countless nights stargazing. He hadn't just found some random place to park Neil. He'd actually owned that patch of desert all along. There's also this, Mr. Daniels said, handed me a sealed envelope of my name in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. Michael, this land lies on the path of ancient stars. Let it remind you that even in darkness, you're never truly alone. Look up, not down. Love, Dad. I read the note 3 times, throat tight, while Karen impatiently flipped through the property documents beside me. Well, this is just great, she finally said, closing the folder with a snap. John leaves me with a mortgage and property taxes, and you get land? How is that fair? Mr. Daniels cleared his throat. The mortgage insurance paid off the house loan, Karen. And while the desert property has negligible tax value, it's been fully paid for years. On the silent drive home, I stared out the window, trying to process everything. Dad had secretly bought our stargazing spot. He'd put a trailer on it, and now it was mine. The next morning, Karen cornered me at breakfast. We need to talk about selling that land, she said, sliding real estate listings across the table. These desert parcels are going for decent money with all the Californians moving in. We could split it 50-50. That's the fair thing to do. I nearly choked on my cereal. Sell it? I just found out about it yesterday. It's useless land, Michael. What are you going to do with 40 acres of nothing? You're in college. You need money for tuition, not dirt and rocks. What Karen didn't understand, what she never understood about Dad or me, was that those 40 acres weren't nothing. They were the backdrop to every meaningful conversation I'd ever had with my father, the place where I first saw Saturn's rings, tracked a meteor shower, and decided that the universe was way more interesting than anything happening at high school parties. I'm not selling, I said firmly. Not now, maybe not ever. This became our new normal. Karen bringing up the land every chance she got, talking about adult decisions, and how Dad would want me to be practical. I started spending more time at college, picking up extra shifts at the campus bookstore, doing anything to avoid coming home. Then came the breaking point, 3 months after Dad's death. I'd stayed late at the college library and came home to find Karen had invited a real estate agent to dinner. Some slick guy in a golf shirt talking about undeveloped parcels and investment potential. I completely lost it. The argument that followed was nuclear. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. Karen's final ultimatum still rings in my ears. While you live under my roof, you'll respect my decisions. Either sell that worthless desert or pack up and live there yourself. Something in me just snapped. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was teenage rebellion. Or maybe it was just the ghostly echo of Dad's voice reminding me what was really important. Fine, I said with a calm that surprised even me. I'll be gone by tomorrow. Karen clearly didn't expect that response. She backpedaled, mentioned my education, my future, how I was being ridiculous. But some decisions feel right even when they make no sense on paper. This was one of them. That night, I packed everything I could fit into my beat-up Honda Civic. Dad's pickup Neil had been sitting non-functional in the garage since his death. Clothes, my laptop, some food from the pantry, and of course, Dad's precious telescope. In the back of Dad's closet, while looking for the telescope case, I found a dusty cardboard box I'd never seen before. Inside were dozens of packets of seeds, carefully labeled in Dad handwriting. Agave, drought-resistant, desert marigold, low water, prickly pear edible fruit. Tucked between the seed packets was a folded note. Plans for Mars. Start preparing for space adventures, son. Typical Dad, planning some science experiment that mixes love of astronomy with botany. The note made me laugh through my tears. Even after death, he was still dropping surprises on me. Dawn found me driving east toward the rising sun, my car crammed with belongings, the telescope riding shotgun and a box of Mars plants in the back. I had no real plan, just a property deed, a set of coordinates, and the strangest feeling that despite all logic, I was heading exactly where I needed to be. I'd taken a semester off college to figure things out, a decision my academic advisor strongly advised against. But sitting in that sterile office, all I could think about was Dad's voice. Astronomers look at nothing and see everything. The dirt road to my 40 acres was barely visible, more suggestion than actual path. After 3 wrong turns and nearly getting stuck in a wash, I finally crested a small rise and saw it. A silver Airstream trailer gleaming in the morning light like some retro spaceship that had crash-landed in the rusty desert. Home, at least for now. As I stepped out of my car, the vastness of what I'd done hit me all at once. I was now the owner of a patch of absolutely nothing in the middle of nowhere, with only a trailer of unknown condition to live in, limited savings, and exactly 0 experience in desert survival. What the hell was I thinking? Then I looked up at the endless blue sky, felt the sun on my face, and somehow knew Dad was laughing his ass off at my predicament, while also silently applauding my choice. Welcome to adulthood, Cooper. Let's see what you're made of. Turns out, living alone in the desert isn't exactly like those Instagram #vanlife posts make it seem. My first night in Dad's trailer was a reality check. The Airstream looked cool from the outside, but inside it was basically a time capsule from 1985. The cushions smelled musty, the tiny bathroom had seen better days, and when I tried to turn on the lights, absolutely nothing happened. I slept in my car that first night, using my phone's flashlight to hunt for the circuit breaker. Welcome to independence, Cooper. Morning revealed what I couldn't see in the dim evening light. Dad had installed a small solar array and battery system behind the trailer. After some fumbling with switches and cursing at wires, I managed to get power running to the basic outlets. Small victories. The water situation was another story. The trailer had a tank, but it was bone dry. Later I discovered Dad had been hauling water from town in those big blue containers you see at camping stores. The nearest town was 45 minutes away. Another item for my rapidly growing survival essentials list. That first week was brutal. April in the Arizona desert isn't peak summer, but it still hit 90 degrees by midday. The trailer turned into an aluminum oven despite my efforts with the ancient ceiling fan. Every simple task became an expedition. Need to charge your laptop? Hope the solar batteries collected enough juice. Want a shower? Heat water on the propane stove and use a camping shower bag. Need groceries or water? That's a 90-minute round trip to civilization. I started keeping a video diary on my phone, partly to document my stubborn experiment in desert living, partly to have someone to talk to besides the scraggly Joshua tree outside my door. Desert life, day 7. I narrated, panning around the now somewhat cleaner trailer interior. Today I spent an hour talking to a cactus. He was a better conversationalist than my stepmom. At least he didn't try to sell my stuff. My savings from my campus bookstore job were evaporating faster than water in the desert. The solar system needed new batteries. The trailer's roof had a small leak. The ancient mini-fridge barely cooled anything below lukewarm. And let's not even talk about the cost of gas for those town runs. By week 3, I was seriously questioning my life choices. Maybe Karen was right. Maybe this was just worthless land. Maybe I was being a stubborn idiot clinging to some romantic notion that had nothing to do with reality. Then came the night that changed everything. I couldn't sleep. A combination of heat, stress, and the total silence that somehow manages to be louder than any city noise. I took Dad's telescope outside, more out of a need for connection than actual stargazing interest. Setting up the Celestron reminded me of all those nights with Dad, his patient instructions, his excitement when showing me some distant galaxy or nebula. I'd never set it up entirely alone before. The realization hit me hard. I'd never do anything with Dad again. I must have dozed off in a lawn chair after a few hours of half-hearted constellation spotting, because I woke suddenly to complete darkness. The quarter moon had set, and the sky was now a blackness, so absolute it felt like you could fall upward into it. And the stars, my God, the stars. Without the moon's interference, they exploded across the sky in quantities I'd never seen before, even on our weekend trips. The Milky Way wasn't just visible. It was unavoidable, a luminous cloud splitting the heavens. In that moment, something shifted inside me. This land wasn't worthless. This impossible, beautiful emptiness was exactly what Dad had wanted me to have. With renewed purpose, I started exploring the trailer more thoroughly the next day. In a storage compartment under one of the bench seats, I found a lockbox. No key, of course, That would be too easy. It took me 2 days of searching before I found a small key taped inside one of Dad's astronomy books. Inside the box were notebooks, dozens of them, field journals filled with Dad's precise handwriting, detailed star charts, coordinates, and something unexpected, meticulous records of meteor sightings and potential impact sites in the area. Page after page documented meteor showers, with special attention to anything that might have reached the ground. Maps of our property were marked with grid patterns and X's where he'd already searched. This wasn't just casual stargazing. This was a systematic, years-long survey. One entry from 2008 jumped out at me. Theory: property sits on the southeast edge of an ancient impact site. Primary body would have shattered on entry. Fragments possibly scattered across our 40 acres and beyond. Nothing significant found yet, but magnetic anomalies in sectors 3 and 7 warrant further investigation. Dad had been hunting for meteorites for 15 years. The realization hit me like a truck. Dad hadn't bought this land for the stargazing views or as some midlife crisis escape. He bought it because he believed it was special, part of a meteorite-strewn field, a place where pieces of space literally fell to Earth. With my rapidly dwindling funds now a serious problem, I needed to find work. The nearest town, really just a cluster of businesses serving tourists heading to the national parks, had a bar that needed help. Despite zero experience, I convinced the owner, Mac, to hire me for weekend shifts. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to keep me in ramen noodles and gas money. Between shifts, I started studying Dad's notebooks like they were sacred texts. I plotted his search grids on Google Earth, tried to understand his methodology. The more I read, the more I believed he might have been onto something real. Mac's youngest son, Ethan, was a rockhound with all the gear. When I mentioned I was interested in desert geology, he offered to lend me his metal detector. "Just don't go finding no gold mine on your property," he joked. "I'll expect a finder's fee." Armed with the metal detector and Dad's maps, I started exploring Sector 7, an area Dad had marked with multiple question marks. The detector was old school, with headphones that made my ears sweat in the desert heat, but it beat randomly kicking at rocks. For 3 nights running, I found nothing but old beer cans, a horseshoe, and what appeared to be pieces of an ancient barbed wire fence. My enthusiasm was waning. Then, on the 4th night, just as I was about to pack it in, the detector went crazy over what looked like an ordinary chunk of dark rock half buried in the hard desert soil. I dug it out with a garden trowel, wiping off the dust to reveal something distinctly unusual. The rock was heavy for its size, about as big as a walnut, with a dark exterior that had a subtle metallic sheen when I angled it toward my headlamp. When I scraped at one small area with my pocket knife, I revealed what looked like tiny green crystals embedded in metallic background. It didn't look like any desert rock I recognized, but I was hardly an expert. Excited but trying not to get my hopes up, I took about 20 photos from different angles and with different lighting. That night, I posted the pictures on Reddit /meteorites with the title. Found this weird rock on my property in AZ Desert. Meteorite or meteorong? I woke up to 47 notifications. My post had blown up overnight, with multiple users expressing excitement. That surface texture looks like a fusion crust, formed when the exterior melts during atmospheric entry. One comment read, "Those green crystals embedded in metal matrix are exactly what you see in palisite meteorites," wrote another. One comment stood out from a user named AsianMeterDoc. "This appears to be a palisite fragment, a very rare type of stony iron meteorite. I'm a geology professor at U of A specializing in meteorites. If you're nearby, I'd be interested in examining the specimen. Could be quite valuable." After some back and forth messages and verification that he was indeed a legitimate professor, thank you, university faculty directories, I agreed to meet Dr. Harmon at a coffee shop in Flagstaff that weekend. Dr. Harmon was not what I expected. Instead of some dusty old professor, he was a woman in her early 40s with a NASA cap and turquoise jewelry. She brought a small kit of testing tools, including a powerful magnifying loupe and a handheld XRF analyzer that looked like a ray gun from a sci-fi movie. Mind if I record this examination for my students? She asked, setting up her phone on a small tripod. I nodded, suddenly nervous that my meteorite would turn out to be nothing special. Dr. Harmon spent 20 minutes examining my rock, occasionally murmuring notes into her phone. The coffee shop patron started giving us curious looks as she performed various tests, including checking if it was magnetic, and examining its density. Finally, she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Well, Michael," she said, carefully placing the rock on a felt cloth between us. "Congratulations! This is absolutely a palisite meteorite fragment, and a pretty nice one at that." My heart nearly stopped. "You're serious? It's actually from space?" "More specifically, it's from the boundary between the core and mantle of an asteroid that broke up billions of years ago. Those green crystals are olivine, essentially the same mineral as peridot, embedded in an iron-nickel matrix." My mind was reeling. I was holding a piece of an asteroid, something that formed billions of years ago, traveled through space, and somehow ended up buried in the dirt on my property. So is it worth anything? I finally asked, feeling slightly guilty for immediately thinking about money. "Palisites are among the rarest meteorite types," Dr. Harmon explained. "Depending on condition and quality, they can sell for anywhere from $50 to $500 per gram. This piece is probably around 25 grams, so potentially quite valuable. But its scientific value is even greater." She went on to explain how meteorites help scientists understand the formation of the solar system and planetary bodies. This particular type revealed information about the interiors of asteroids and the processes that formed them. Dr. Harmon introduced me to a collector who offered $3,000 for a small section of my meteorite, money I desperately needed for trailer repairs and basic survival. I felt a pang selling even a piece of my first space rock, but the transaction solved my immediate financial crisis, while leaving me with a larger portion of the specimen. After examining Dad's notebooks and hearing about the property's location, Dr. Harmon's scientific curiosity was definitely triggered. "Your father might have been onto something significant," she said as we parted ways. "This area of northern Arizona is part of what we informally call the Meteorite Alley, a corridor where multiple known meteorite falls have been documented." She explained how meteorites often scatter across a strewn field when they break up during atmospheric entry. If Dad's theory was correct, our property might contain more fragments from an ancient fall that had never been properly documented. "Would you be interested in a more systematic survey of your land?" she asked. "I have students who need field experience, and this could be a mutually beneficial arrangement." Just like that, my isolated desert existence gained purpose and direction. The land that Karen had dismissed as worthless might actually be valuable in ways none of us had imagined. That night, sitting outside the trailer under the vast star field, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had since his death. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known this piece of desert wasn't just empty space. It was a treasure map written in the language of the stars. I pulled out my phone to update my video diary. Desert life, day 37. I began holding up my remaining piece of the palisite so it caught the light. Today, I held a piece of another world in my hands. And I think this is just the beginning. I couldn't have known then how right I was, or how that little walnut-sized rock would completely change the trajectory of my life. Hunting for space rocks became my new normal. After that first palisite find, my property wasn't just a patch of desert anymore. It was a potential treasure trove. Dr. Harmon connected me with a small network of meteorite hunters and researchers who took my dad's theory seriously. Suddenly, the lonely kid in a trailer had purpose, community, and something that felt suspiciously like a future. But success doesn't happen overnight, not even when you're literally looking for stars that fell to Earth. The first year was a grind. I kept my bartending job at Mac's, often closing the place at 2 a.m., grabbing 4 hours of sleep, then heading out with a metal detector before the worst heat of the day kicked in. My social life consisted entirely of regulars at the bar and online meteorite forums. I found a few more specimens over the next 6 months. Nothing spectacular, mostly smaller fragments of ordinary chondrites. They sold to collectors for enough to fund gradual improvements to the trailer. First, a proper water collection system, then better solar panels, and finally that blessed window AC unit that saved me from slow cooking in the summer heat. With Dr. Harmon's encouragement, I enrolled in online geology courses through Arizona State. The bartending money paid the bills, while the occasional meteorite find funded my education. Balanced, sort of, between shifts and study sessions. I continued mapping Dad's notebooks against the actual terrain. His meticulous grid system covered most of our 40 acres, with special attention to what he labeled Zone X, an area along the eastern ridge that he'd circled repeatedly with notes about magnetic anomalies and potential subsurface deposits. The problem was, Zone X was the least accessible part of the property, a steep, rocky slope covered in dense creosote bushes and cacti. Dad's notebook showed he'd made multiple attempts to survey it, but the difficult terrain had limited his progress. Every weekend for months, I'd tackle a different section of Zone X, fighting through the brush with my metal detector, usually returning with nothing but scratches and sunburn for my trouble. "You're obsessed, dude," Ethan told me one evening as we sat on my trailer steps, drinking beers after he'd helped me install a new propane tank. "You know the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over, and expecting different results." I finished, Yeah, but Dad was onto something with Zone X. I can feel it." Ethan shook his head. "Your dad was awesome, man. Great teacher. But maybe this was just his hobby, not some $1 million treasure hunt." I couldn't explain why, but I knew Dad hadn't been wrong. The Zone X mystery haunted me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Nature finally gave me the break I needed in the form of Arizona's infamous monsoon season. That July brought the most intense storm I'd ever witnessed. Not just rain, but biblical-level flooding. Water cascaded down from the higher desert plateaus, turning dry washes into raging rivers within minutes. I spent a terrifying night in the trailer as it rocked in the wind, watching through the windows as lightning turned the landscape into strobing snapshots of chaos. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed desert. New channels cut to the land, rocks and vegetation displaced, and parts of my property I barely recognized. The eastern ridge, Zone X, had suffered a significant landslide. A section about 20 feet wide had simply collapsed, leaving a raw wound in the hillside. Once the ground dried enough to walk on, I headed out to assess the damage. The landslide had exposed layers of soil and rock normally hidden beneath the surface. Dad's voice echoed in my head from one of our desert trips. "Erosion is a geologist's best friend. It does the digging for you." As I approached the slide area, something caught my eye, a peculiar greenish-black object partially embedded in the newly exposed soil. At first, I thought it might be a piece of weathered copper pipe or some old trash. But as I got closer, my heart started pounding. This wasn't metal debris or garbage. It was something else entirely, a dark mass with a distinctly non-terrestrial appearance. I carefully excavated around it, finding that what I initially thought was just a small fragment was actually the exposed tip of something much larger. After 2 hours of careful digging, I had uncovered what appeared to be a meteorite roughly the size of a basketball, with an estimated weight of around 7 kilograms. The specimen had an unusual greenish-black exterior, with a crystalline quality I hadn't seen in any of my previous finds. When sunlight hit certain angles, it seemed to glow from within, revealing complex internal structures. My hands were shaking as I took photos from every angle. This wasn't just another ordinary chondrite or small fragment. This was substantial, unusual, and potentially extremely valuable. I immediately sent the photos to Dr. Harmon with the subject line, "Zone X delivered. Need you to see this ASAP." Her response came within minutes. "Stay there. Don't move it. I'm driving up tomorrow." The 24 hours I waited for Dr. Harmon were the longest of my life. I barely slept, setting up a small tent near the find site, irrationally afraid that someone might somehow discover and steal my meteorite in the middle of nowhere. Dr. Harmon arrived with 2 graduate students and more equipment than I thought could fit in her Subaru. The moment she saw the meteorite in person, her professional composure cracked. "Oh my God," she whispered, crouching beside the partially excavated mass. "I think this is a diogenite, a large, intact diogenite." She explained that diogenites were extremely rare meteorites believed to come from the asteroid Vesta, the second largest object in the asteroid belt. They contain minerals and crystal structures rarely found on Earth, offering a unique window into formation of rocky bodies in our solar system. "Michael," she said, looking at me with an intensity that made me nervous, "do you understand what you found? This could be one of the most significant meteorite discoveries in decades, not just because of its size, but its apparently pristine condition." The excavation took 3 more days of careful work. The meteorite was eventually confirmed to weigh 7.3 kilograms and was indeed a diogenite, one of the largest and most well-preserved examples ever found. Word spread quickly through scientific circles. Within a week, I was fielding calls from universities, museums, and private collectors, all eager to acquire my space rock. The offers ranged from the modest to the mind-blowing, with private collectors quoting figures that made my bartending salary look like pocket change. Dr. Harmon walked me through my options. The commercial value is between $1,000 to $2,000 per gram, depending on quality. At over 7 kilograms, we're talking potentially $7 to $14 million from private collectors. My head spun as she continued. But the scientific value is incalculable. This specimen could yield research papers for years. Museums and research institutions can't match private offers, but they could probably pool resources for something in the $1 to $2 million range. I found myself facing a choice I never imagined: maximize profit or prioritize science. The bartender in me saw financial security. No more student loans, a real house, maybe even early retirement. But the son of a science teacher, the kid who grew up learning that knowledge was sacred, hesitated. Dad would have donated it to science without a second thought. But Dad had also left me with nothing but this land and his dream. After days of internal debate, I reached a compromise that felt right. I would sell 20% of the meteorite to private collectors at premium rates and donate 80% to a consortium of museums and research institutions for a more modest but still life-changing sum. The final agreement landed at $1.2 million, less than I could have gotten, but with the satisfaction of knowing Dad's legacy would contribute to human knowledge. Plus, a clause ensuring that any scientific papers resulting from research on the meteorite would acknowledge John Cooper's original survey work that led to the discovery. Just like that, the kid who'd been counting quarters for gas money became a millionaire. Sort of. I wish I could say I handled sudden wealth with perfect maturity. There were a few indulgences: a reliable new truck to replace my dying Honda, a proper rain collection system for the trailer, and paying off my existing student loans. But the wildest purchase wasn't for me. I hired a local contractor to finally fix Dad's old Chevy pickup, Neil. Getting that beast running again cost more than it was worth, but every time I heard its engine rumble to life, I felt Dad's approval. After the initial excitement faded, I faced the question: what now? I could move back to civilization, buy a nice house, finish my degree in person instead of online, leave the desert experiment behind as a crazy chapter in my life. Instead, I found myself sketching plans for something entirely different: a small visitor center built around Dad's trailer, a museum space to display smaller meteorite specimens, and a modest observatory housing Dad's telescope plus newer equipment. I called it the Cooper Meteorite Sanctuary in the initial drawings, something between a science center and a memorial to Dad. The rough business plan projected modest income from educational tours, amateur astronomy nights, and the occasional meteorite hunting workshop. My financial advisor, yes, I had one of those now, thought I was nuts. You're sitting on 40 acres of increasingly valuable desert property near Sedona, and you want to build a science museum instead of luxury homes. But the plan resonated with Dr. Harmon and her university colleagues. They connected me with an educational nonprofit status expert, helped secure matching funds for STEM education facilities, and suddenly my crazy dream had institutional backing. Construction began 9 months after the diogenite discovery. I kept Dad's Airstream as the centerpiece, building the visitor center around it like a museum exhibit on early desert astronomy. The observatory dome housed not just Dad's refurbished telescope, but new equipment that allowed for digital imaging and remote classroom access. When Cooper Space Center officially opened 18 months after I'd first moved to property, I stood in the parking area, once just dusty desert, watching the first school bus a student arrive, and thought about how far I'd come from that first night sleeping in my car. The discovery caught media attention beyond the scientific community. Local news did a feature on the bartender who found a fortune in his backyard. Then regional outlets picked it up as a quirky human interest story. By the time National Geographic came calling for a feature on America's meteorite kid, I'd stopped being surprised by the attention. "Aren't you worried about treasure hunters invading your property now?" one reporter asked. I laughed. The beautiful thing about meteorites is that they've been sitting there for thousands of years. The valuable ones on my land have already been cataloged and secured. Anyone wants to search the rest of the property is welcome to, with a day pass purchase and supervised tour, of course. The reality of my new life settled into a rhythm I could never have predicted. Weekday mornings were for my own studies. I'd switch majors from general astronomy to planetary geology. Afternoons were for running the center with my small staff of part-time students and volunteer astronomy enthusiasts. Evenings often featured stargazing groups or meteorite workshops. I still lived in Dad's trailer, though I'd renovated it properly. Something about moving into a fancy house seemed like it would disconnect me from where this all started. The trailer reminded me daily of that impulsive decision to leave Karen's house, of learning to survive on my own, of finding purpose in what others saw as worthless. One evening, as I watched visitors excitedly examining the diogenite display, the 10% portion I'd kept for exhibition, I caught myself thinking how differently things might have gone if I'd given in to Karen's pressure to sell this worthless land. Some might call finding $1 million meteorite dumb luck. But I remembered all those notebooks, Dad's systematic surveys, his careful calculations. He'd known something special was waiting to be found. Not the specifics, perhaps, but the potential. Dad used to say that in science, luck favors a prepared mind. I was just lucky enough to be my father's son. 3 years after storming out of Karen's house with nothing but Dad's telescope and a box of Mars plants, I'd barely recognized my own life. The angry, confused 19-year-old living in a decrepit trailer had somehow morphed into a 22-year-old business owner with a staff, an educational center, and an investment portfolio. Yeah, that last part still feels weird to say out loud. Me, investment portfolio. Life takes some strange turns. After the diogenite discovery and the subsequent media attention, I had to make some adult decisions quickly. The first, hiring professionals who knew what they were doing, because I sure as hell didn't. Melissa, my financial advisor, became my lifeline in those early days. A no-nonsense former Wall Street type who'd escaped to Arizona for the quiet life, she didn't sugarcoat anything. "Listen, kid," she told me during our first meeting, "most lottery winners and sudden millionaires are broke within 5 years. You're young, you have no financial education, and everyone's going to come at you with opportunities. My job is making sure you're not broke by 25. Under her guidance, I parked the majority of the money in conservative investments, earmarked a specific portion for education, both mine and the center's development, and set up a structure that would provide modest but steady income regardless of how the center performed. The Cooper Space Center evolved from my napkin sketches into something legitimate. We obtained official status as an educational nonprofit, which came with tax benefits and grant opportunities one never would have navigated alone. The University of Arizona became a partner, sending geology students for field experience and providing academic credibility to our exhibits. My own education shifted into high gear too. I transferred from community college to Arizona State's geology program, taking most classes online, but traveling to campus for lab work. With financial pressure removed, studying became a pleasure rather than a stress point. The center wasn't Disney World, but we found our niche. School groups came for educational field trips. Amateur astronomy clubs held star parties under our exceptionally dark skies. Desert tourists looking for something more substantial than gift shops added us to their itineraries. I hired 2 full-time staff. Darlene, a retired science teacher who managed educational programs, and Marco, who handled maintenance and site operations. Student interns from the university rotated through, gaining experience while bringing fresh energy and ideas. Our little gift shop, originally just a corner of the visitor center selling meteorite postcards, eventually expanded to include educational materials, telescopes, and certified meteorite fragments. These small revenue streams, combined with admission fees and workshop charges, made the center financially sustainable. Not wildly profitable, but stable. Life fell into a rhythm I enjoyed. I divided my time between studies, center management, and my own ongoing meteorite hunting. Some habits die hard. The quiet isolation that once felt like punishment now felt like privilege. Few people get 40 acres of pristine desert as their backyard. Then came the day I saw Karen's familiar SUV pulling into our visitor parking lot. I was on the observation deck, helping a group of high school students with telescope calibration, when Darlene's voice came through on the walkie-talkie. "Michael, there's someone here claiming to be your stepmother?" The confusion in her voice was warranted. In 3 years, I'd never once mentioned Karen to my staff. My personal history was something I kept separate from my professional life. My stomach clenched as I watched her step out of her vehicle, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes as she surveyed our modest operation. She looked exactly the same, yet I felt like I was seeing her from a completely different height now. As I approached, I noticed she was clutching a rolled-up magazine. Arizona Living, our regional lifestyle publication. They'd recently done a feature on the center, calling me Arizona's meteorite wunderkind and the pioneer of astrotourism. Ridiculous labels that made me cringe, but apparently made for good copy. "Michael," she said, removing her sunglasses. "This place is impressive." Coming from Karen, that was practically effusive praise. I nodded, suddenly tongue-tied despite dealing with visitors every day. This wasn't a visitor. This was a woman who'd told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The gift shop has some nice meteorite specimens. I finally managed, if you're interested. For the next hour, I gave Karen the standard tour, introducing her to staff as a family friend rather than reveal our complicated relationship. She nodded politely at exhibits she couldn't possibly care about, asked appropriate questions, and generally behaved like the perfect visitor. Only when we reached the diogenite display, our pride and joy, did her composure crack slightly. "This is it? The one worth millions?" she asked, staring at the specially lit specimen behind bulletproof glass. "A portion of it," I explained. "Most is with research institutions." Something flickered across her face. Calculation, perhaps. It reminded me of those breakfast table conversations where she pushed real estate listings at me. After the tour, I reluctantly invited her to the trailer for coffee. I'd renovated it completely by then, new appliances, actual furniture, proper insulation, but kept the vintage Airstream shell intact as a reminder of my starting point. Karen settled onto my couch, looking more uncomfortable than the comfortable furniture warranted. "So," she began, placing her coffee mug carefully on a coaster, "I see you've done well for yourself." The understatement nearly made me laugh. 3 years ago, she'd been convinced I was ruining my life over worthless desert acreage. "The land turned out to have value after all," I replied, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Water under the bridge. We both said things we didn't mean. I always believed you had potential, Michael. The blatant revisionism should have angered me, but instead, I just felt tired. What was the point of rehashing old arguments? We both knew why she was here. What can I do for you, Karen?" I asked directly. She straightened, slipping into what I recognized as her business proposal posture, the same one she'd used when trying to convince me to sell the land. "I've been thinking about our relationship, about family. We should put the past behind us. Work together. Family supporting family, like your father would have wanted." There was the invocation of Dad's wishes, conveniently reinterpreted now that my worthless inheritance had proven valuable. The younger me would have thrown her out immediately, but 3 years of building something from nothing had changed me. Success was its own form of freedom. I didn't need to prove anything to Karen anymore. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked, curious despite myself. Karen's pitch was exactly what I expected. She had connections in Sedona's tourism industry, could help professionalize the center, bring in high-end clientele instead of school groups, all for a reasonable partnership stake. Of course. I listened without interrupting as she outlined her vision of Cooper Space Center transformed into something unrecognizable. More gift shop than education, more profit than purpose. When she finally finished, I took a moment to sip my coffee, gathering thoughts that surprised even me with their clarity. You know, Karen, I've learned a lot these past few years. The most valuable things in life aren't those that bring in money, but those that have meaning. Her smile faltered slightly as I continued. Dad didn't leave me this land because it might contain valuable meteorites. He left it because this place mattered to him, to us, the astronomy, the desert nights, the connection to something bigger than ourselves. That's what I'm building here. I gestured toward the center visible through my window. Those school kids who can't afford fancy telescopes, they matter. The research we support, that matters. The legacy we're creating in Dad's name, that matters most of all. Karen's expression shifted several times as I spoke, from confusion to calculation to something that might have been grudging respect. So that's a no to my proposal, she said flatly. That's a no to changing what we've built, I clarified. But if you genuinely want to start your own venture, I'd be happy to offer advice or even some startup guidance. I've learned a lot about business development these past couple years. The offer clearly wasn't what she expected. For a moment, genuine emotion, surprise, confusion, broke through a polished veneer. You'd help me? After everything? Not because of the past. Because of what I've learned since then. Karen left shortly after, without accepting or rejecting my counteroffer. As I watched her SUV disappear down our access road, I realized I felt nothing but mild relief. No anger, no resentment, no desire for vindication. Her approval or disapproval simply didn't matter anymore. That evening, as the desert cooled and visitors departed, I sat on the trailer's roof deck, my favorite renovation edition, with a beer, thinking about family, the one we're born into and the one we create. My staff, the university partners, even regulars like old Jim who volunteered as a docent every Tuesday. They'd become my chosen family. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Harmon. Just heard back from the grant committee. The John Cooper Memorial Scholarship is approved. This was the project I've been most excited about. A scholarship fund in Dad's name for low-income students pursuing astronomy or geology degrees. We'd start with 2 scholarships per year, with preference given to students who, as the application would state, see value where others see nothing. I raised my beer to the emerging stars. We did it, Dad. I said aloud to the empty desert. Your name's going to be attached to something that matters. The next morning, I held our regular staff meeting with a new energy. We reviewed visitor numbers, steadily increasing, upcoming school bookings, looking solid through spring, and maintenance needs. The observatory dome motor was making concerning noises. One more thing, I added as we wrapped up. I need someone to spearhead our new scholarship program. Any takers? Darlene, our education director, immediately volunteered. My pleasure. Nothing better than watching young minds light up when they see Saturn's rings for the first time. The scholarship announcement generated more local press, including a nice feature in the Arizona Republic. The reporter asked what motivated me to fund educational opportunities rather than expand commercial operations. The answer came easily. My father was a science teacher. He believed education was the ultimate investment, the only one with guaranteed returns. If you teach someone to see the universe differently, that change lasts forever. Later that month, I received a formal letter from the State Astronomy Association notifying me that the Cooper Space Center had been selected to host the annual Perseid Meteor Shower Watch Party, a prestigious event usually held at major observatories. Your unique combination of dark sky conditions, educational facilities, and meteorite expertise makes the center an ideal venue, the letter read. When I shared the news with the staff, Marco immediately started calculating logistics. Parking expansion, portable toilets, refreshment vendors. Darlene began designing special educational materials for the thousands of visitors expected. Me? I just stood on our observation deck, Looking out at the desert that had once seemed like my personal prison and was now a destination people traveled specifically to visit, the irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had been right about one thing. The land did have financial value, just not in the way either of us had imagined, not as real estate to be sold and developed, but as a preserved space where people could connect with the cosmos. As the center's reputation grew, I received an unexpected email from my old academic advisor at the community college, the one who'd strongly advised against my semester off. "Just wanted to say I'm glad you didn't listen to me," she wrote. "Sometimes a non-traditional path is exactly right. We're bringing 60 STEM students to your meteor shower event. Save me a good viewing spot." That spring, I finally completed my bachelor's degree in geology with a minor in astronomy. The university invited me to speak at the departmental graduation ceremony, an honor I initially tried to decline until Dr. Harmon convinced me it would be good publicity for the center. "Talk about finding your path," she advised. "These kids are terrified about what comes next." Standing at the podium, looking out at rows of graduates who were essentially my peers, I abandoned my carefully prepared remarks about meteor classification. 3 years ago, I was living in a leaky trailer with no running water, trying to prove something to myself and everyone else. I began. Today I'm still living in that trailer, but by choice, and I run an educational center that just received state recognition. The difference isn't luck or even meteorites, it's purpose. I saw heads nodding, some students leaning forward slightly. "Most of you won't discover rare meteorites worth millions," I continued. "But all of you will face moments where conventional wisdom tells you to take the safe path, while something inside pulls you toward uncertainty. Sometimes the greatest discoveries are made when you ignore the map and follow the stars instead." The applause felt surreal, as did the line of students who approached afterward asking about internship possibilities at the center. That evening, Dr. Harmon and I shared a celebratory dinner at a restaurant far fancier than my usual haunts. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating something special, she answered before I could. "We're celebrating a young man who built something meaningful from nothing but desert and determination." I blushed, embarrassed by the praise, but also recognizing the truth in it. In 3 short years, I'd gone from angry kid to someone with responsibility, purpose, and a legacy larger than himself. Later, alone in my Airstream under the desert stars, I pulled out the last thing I kept from my previous life, the note Dad had left with his Mars plant seeds. The paper was worn from frequent handling, but his words remained clear. "Plans for Mars. Start preparing for space adventures, son." Turns out he wasn't just talking about gardening. 5 years after that first night sleeping in my car beside Dad's trailer, my life has found its orbit. At 24, I've completed my double major in geology and astronomy, run a successful educational center, and somehow become the guy journalists call when they need a quote about meteorites or space education. The Cooper Space Center now employs 12 full-time staff and hosts over 15,000 visitors annually. Not bad for a patch of worthless desert. Last year, I finally bought a proper house in Sedona. Nothing flashy but comfortable, with a small observatory dome on the roof that would have made Dad grin from ear to ear. The financial advisors and investment decisions that once felt so foreign now seem routine. Amazing what you can learn when necessity forces your hand. Yet despite the comfortable new house, I still spend at least 2 nights a week in Dad's old Airstream trailer. I've renovated it completely. Solar power, modern amenities, a roof deck for stargazing, but kept its soul intact. It remains my favorite place to think, work, and connect with the stars. A reporter once asked why a successful entrepreneur would choose to spend nights in a trailer when I could afford luxury hotels. "You can't see the Milky Way this clearly from the Ritz-Carlton," I told her. "Besides, the cacti out here remain my most honest critics. When I get too full of myself, they're quick to remind me with a well-placed spine." What I didn't tell her was how the trailer keeps me grounded, connected to that desperate kid who arrived with nothing but determination and his father's telescope. Some things you can't explain to those who haven't lived them. The scientific impact of our diagenite discovery exceeded all expectations. Research teams at 3 universities have published over 20 papers analyzing its unique composition. Last year, researchers identified a previously unknown mineral within the specimen and named it cooperite. Not after me, but after Dad. The certificate hangs in our main exhibit hall. The Cooper Space Center has evolved from a curiosity to a respected institution. NASA sent representatives to our educational programs last spring. The University of Arizona uses our facility for field training. Most importantly to me, thousands of school kids from across Arizona have experienced their first real encounter with astronomy and geology here, on ground once deemed worthless. Dad's box of Mars plants eventually inspired our most ambitious project, the Mars Habitat Garden. Working with botanical experts from the Desert Research Institute, we've created an experimental plot where we test plants that might someday grow in Martian greenhouses. The extreme desert conditions provide a surprisingly effective analog for Mars surface challenges. When the first desert marigolds bloomed from Dad's original seed packets, I admit I shed a few tears. His wild science teacher dream had taken root, literally and figuratively. The garden has attracted attention from actual space agencies and research teams working on Mars colonization projects. Dad would have lost his mind with excitement. Our annual Cooper Skywatch during the Perseid meteor shower has become a regional tradition. Hundreds of families camp on our property, attending workshops by day and watching for meteors by night. The event sells out months in advance, with proceeds funding our scholarship programs. During this year's Skywatch, I led a special tour for a group of kids from a Phoenix Youth Center, students who might never have seen truly dark skies or looked through a professional telescope. One boy, about 10 years old with serious eyes behind thick glasses, asked me how to find his own star, not by a star naming certificate, but discover something real, something that mattered. The question hit me hard, echoing across the 5 years since I'd asked myself the same thing. I carefully handed him Dad's old Celestron, the same telescope that had accompanied me on that first night in the desert. I didn't become successful because I found a valuable rock, I told him as he peered through the eyepiece. I found the rock because I was afraid to look up when everyone else was looking down. His smile when he first spotted Saturn's rings reflected everything the center was built to achieve. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that Dad would have approved of what his legacy had become. After the visitors departed and the staff headed home, I climbed to my favorite spot, the roof deck of the Airstream. The Perseid shower was still going strong, occasional meteors streaking across the darkness like celestial punctuation marks. I opened Dad's original notebook, its pages now familiar as old friends. On the final blank page, I wrote, "Dad, you were right. This land truly did touch the stars. But now I understand, not because meteorites fell here, but because a man who knew how to dream once stood here." In 5 years, I've traveled from angry, homeless teenager to someone with purpose, knowledge, and the means to share both. The path wasn't straight or easy, but like the meteorites I hunt, sometimes the most valuable journeys involve fire, impact, and transformation. The desert that once seemed empty is now filled with meaning, educational exhibits, research projects, and the laughter of children discovering the universe for the first time. Karen was right about the land having value, just wrong about what kind. Dad knew. Somehow, he always knew what this place could become. As another meteor streaks overhead, I make a silent toast to the man who taught me to look up, to the desert that taught me perseverance, and to the stars that showed me direction. The night sky above me isn't empty space. It's possibility, written in light that has traveled millions of years to reach us. Some people spend their whole lives searching for their purpose. Thanks to Dad, a dusty patch of desert, and a few rocks from space, I found mine before I turned 25. Not bad for a worthless inheritance, all things considered.